Now I want to go to something more specific and more complex. Internet. Have you seen graphs like that before? You actually have seen it, I'm going to show you, but let's look at the story of the internet just to understand why we would get such a graph, okay? Internet started way back, right? Any idea when? So 50s, 60s, okay? It started as an army technology. When it started evolving, of course, it was not good enough for anything. Then it became good enough for the army. It kept evolving. It became good enough for universities, and then it became good enough for a much bigger world, okay? When it started, it was actually secret, okay? So there was no awareness of that at all, and gradually it grew. It grew until all the world became aware of the internet. Now, why was there a big buzz about the internet? What was special about it? More than maybe virtual reality or some of the other cool things we're seeing, yeah. What's amazing about the internet?
It's mostly free.
I'm sorry?
It's free.
It's free, okay, that's good, even though today it's changing, yeah.
Information flow.
It's information flow, yes. What about the internet? That's amazing, yeah.
Maybe because it connects people together.
It connects people together. And actually, it's a new infrastructure, okay? It's a whole new infrastructure that is being created. Infrastructure like trains, infrastructure like electricity, it's a whole new infrastructure. Now what happened is that sort of in the 90s, a lot of people starting to realize that this is what the internet is all about. It's going to be a new infrastructure. Now, if this new infrastructure is coming up, you want to be part of that, don't you? You want to make sure you're there. You know, it's like a new country is being created. It's something completely new, and it's going to change the world. It is going to change the lives of many people. It's going to open tons of new opportunities. You want to be there. So you see this big excitement. A lot of people wanting to be there. Many startups try to do things for the internet. Investors poured a lot of money into the internet. There was this big bubble. What happened next? Why did it go down? Technology was not developed enough. Maybe that's one of the story, even though it kept developing. What happened? What happened in 2000, 2001 and 2? I'm sorry? There was a big crisis, right? Why was a big crisis? What did people feel about the internet in 2002 that they did not feel about it in 99, 3 years ago? What happened?
They need it.
I'm sorry?
It's not real value. Value is like...
They couldn't really understand the real value of it in 2002, for example. Yeah, heard something else? There was a big, big disappointment. Why? Because you think about an infrastructure, a whole new world, you think about everything is possible, okay? So you're very, very excited about that, and then suddenly you begin to realize that, you know, not everything is possible. Maybe some of the technology is not ready yet. It won't do everything. It will do some of the things I expected. A big disappointment. And then you see this very big drop there, a big crisis, okay, a big crisis, and then it sort of gets to a very low point in 2004, okay, it's horrible. 2002 and 3 were the worst time to be. 2004, the world started to figure out that maybe it will survive. It will survive, and internet will work eventually, yeah.
Is it falling? Like people disconnected from the internet during those years? It was always rising.
It was always, exactly, it was always rising. The technology was always getting better, always getting better. So this is the curve, okay? That's a curve like the Google curves. That's a curve of, you can put many things there in the y-axis, but like visibility or money invested in or people working in that space, okay? And all these curves will correlate. It's a good question, okay? So a big disappointment, and then things start coming up again. Things started coming up again, why? Because the internet does have value, and that's a whole new infrastructure that is created, right? So it does create value. Today, if you think about stuff we're doing today, so today we're somewhere here. We're somewhere here, and eventually there'll still be a lot of work and a lot of value to be gained from the internet. Okay, so this would be a graph, okay, that might be also typical for new technologies, and that involves the S-curve only talked about the ability of the technology, okay, the capability of the technology, assuming that once it gets better, people are going to use that. This is something else. Why? Because it talks about the development of the technology, and then it talks about why would there be a big disappointment? What would the ecosystem do about that? Okay, so this is a typical curve of emerging technologies. That is, it's emerging. We think it's going to take off. We have a lot of hopes for that. We get excited. Then it might take off or maybe not. There's some disappointment. And then either it continues to taking off or it actually dies. Okay, so that's a typical curve. And for that curve, we actually have a name today. And today it's called the hype cycle of Gartner. Gartner is a company, okay, that employs a lot of analysts. Their job is actually to think about trends and to think about the future. And what they do every year and all the time also, of course, they have a lot of reports which you can buy for a lot of money. But what they actually do, they try to rank the emerging technologies. And they try to tell you where these technologies are on the hype cycle. Okay, so if you're interested in any new technology, that's one of the most useful things you can do. By the way, you can find this graph, for example, on the web that would be free. If you really want to understand a specific area, you better go and read the report. But let's see, what do we see here? So they look at a variety of technologies, and they tell us if they think that they are on the rise of the hype, maybe on the top of the hype, maybe at the bottom, and maybe also after that. Okay, now for you, okay, depending who you are and what's your interest in that technology, you basically want to know where you are. And for example, let's look at some examples. I actually look at neurobusiness, okay? Neurobusiness, you know what that is? Neurobusiness, neuroscience, neurobusiness has something to do with that? I'm sorry? So it's related to neuroeconomics, but neurobusiness is targeted more towards marketing. Okay, so neurobusiness saying, how do I understand what decisions people are making? And it uses, for example, it actually looks at your eyes and your gaze and things like that. Okay, so neurobusiness is one of those areas. If you look at Gartner, you believe them. It says it's on the rise. Okay, so it's new. No wonder many of you didn't hear about that, okay, because it's emerging. And it's on the emerging part of the emerging technologies, okay, so it's fairly new. And I think maybe for you, okay, that's something you might want to be interested in. Why it might be related to what you're doing. It's still not happening yet very strongly. So we can look at how it evolves, okay, so that's one example. You can look at different examples here. For example, you can look at big data. You know what big data is? You know what big data is, right? I'm sorry? Ken, okay, you can look at big data, this one here, okay? You heard of big data, right? The use of big data. You would have thought it's here or on the rise. Where would you say big data is? Everybody's talking about big data today.
It's on the rise.
Okay, so this is from 2014. Let's see what it says in 2015, for example. Okay, so what happens in the year later? You look for big data, and guess what? Where is big data? Okay, it's gone. Okay, well, it's not in this curve. Why is big data not on this curve? Is it really gone? It's not gone. We know it's happening, right? Two things may happen. Okay, one, it's not emerging anymore. Okay, so they don't care about it anymore because it's here, and that's it. This is only emerging technologies. Okay, so they just look at things that are emerging. Once it gets to the point where it's here in the graph, okay, they don't care about it anymore. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing might happen is maybe big data became so understood today that we can find it here under different names. Okay, under different names that are more specific to things that we do with big data. Okay, so this is the kind of information you can get from this graph. So whatever new technology you want to look at, that's one thing you actually want to make sure. And if you're looking for opportunities, that will be one thing you just want to scan and just make sure that you want to know what's happening here. Yeah? Yeah, sure.
When we look at the hype cycle here, because it's going to change every year or whenever the analysts agree, and it's a prediction.
Yeah.
So everything which is on the hype curve is not going to follow the trend.
Exactly.
It's going to
And
change.
also many of the things that are actually, for example, going down, many of them will not rise. Okay, they will just die. Things happen and things die. Okay, not every technology succeeds.
It's not of much use actually then.
Okay.
If they're predicting one thing and next year it's not there, it's not following the curve, then what's the point to follow the?
Okay, so first of all, predictions are predictions. Okay, absolutely yes, that's very true. It could be useful, for example, if you spot a technology on this side of the curve or on this side of the curve. It's a huge difference, okay? Now, of course, that's their opinion. But for you, for example, as an if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you want to catch a technology that is actually here, okay? You want to catch it here. You want to be ready and say, okay, I know it's too early yet, but I think it's going to take a lot of time to develop. I want to develop it in a certain way that brings into account the fact that there are going to be a lot of issues there and it might not be smooth. It's a very different story if you join something here, okay? So this just gives you more information. There's also a lot of data that you can read about it and about this emerging technology. But that's exactly the thing, okay? You never know what's going to happen, but you want to get a feel for what may happen and what might not happen. Because otherwise, of course, you don't know, but one thing is to say, okay, I know nothing about the future, or to say, I have opinions about the future. And the trends actually give you the opportunity to have opinions about the future. This is really what you want to have. You want to get knowledge and opinions. And by the way, one more thing is to, once you get into a specific area, is to try to understand why this happens and how things evolved within it, okay? Not just look from the outside, but within. And then you get an expert in an area, you have your own opinion, which might be better than Gartner's opinion, for example. Okay, so what they say is not like the truth. Yeah.
What is smart dust?
I'm sorry, which one?
Smart dust.
Smart dust. Okay, smart dust says it's a rising thing, but basically it's like dust that doesn't stick to anything. That's I think it's part of it. You know what? I'm not sure. Why don't you go and check it out? No, now you have. You can check it out. Okay, but there's one thing about making dust that does not stick to stuff. The other one is actually putting some intelligence into it, which might say that you're actually making very small particles that have intelligence in them. So I guess it's one of these two. I don't know which one it is.
Is any micro-electromechanical systems such as sensors, robots, devices?
They're very, very small.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's smart dust. Okay. That's really cool, okay? No wonder it's at that point. It's actually wonder it's on the graph at all, okay? But maybe one day it will happen. I mean, you think about it, it will happen one day. Here it's more the question of when it will happen. Because at some point we will have the right technologies and it will happen, yeah.
If it's a yellow triangle, then it will take more than 10 years.
Well, this would take like, I don't know how many, I mean, 10 years is, I don't think we're going to see it in 10 years, but sure. Okay, so the whole thing actually maps emerging trends. So if something is not an emerging technology, it's not going to be here. And this is their opinion, okay? That's the best guess about it. Yeah, for example, like, I don't know, you want to think about neuroscience. Okay, neuroscience is a very large area. You want to try and guess about specific areas in neuroscience, which might be more useful in 5 years from now, for example.
Computer interface.
Brain computing. Where is this one?
BCI, brain, under, above the quantum computer. Yes.
Brain-computer interface. This is really cool, actually, right? That's really cool, because what they're saying is one day we're going to have maybe a physical interface between the brain and the computer, right? And they say, yeah, it will take more than 10 years, but a good chance it will happen. We also see today already hackers, right, that do like biological hacking, so they actually put stuff and get connected. So it's possible to do. Okay, so that will happen one day, yeah.
I didn't understand. If I have a technology which is on the region where the graph is going down,
yeah,
it's bad news for me, or I'm still on the graph, so it's good?
First of all, you're still on the graph, it's good. It might actually be good for you even, depending why, because what it says, look, there was a big excitement, now the excitement is over, but now it's time to really understand what might be there. Okay, and actually if you catch it there, and it's going to happen, and you're an expert in that, and you have a reason to believe that it's actually going to take off, that might be a much better time than before the hype. Okay, so it's one more source of information, but it's also a way to think about things. Why? Because we think about a lot of cool stuff for the future, and this gives you a language and some terms to make it more specific. Okay? More questions about that? Okay. I tried to look at neurobioscience, okay? So I did the Google trends of that. So I could see actually that it's not a very new thing. So that people keep talking about that. It looks like now it's taking off, Okay, do you see like the end of the curve there, the blue one? Looks like now it's taking off. I know that there's a lot of talk about that, marketing companies. I know that in the business school also we have professors that are dealing with that, so maybe that will take off, who knows. If you look at the bottom one, I actually put neuroeconomics and neurobioscience, okay? So you can see that the neuroeconomics was very strong and very popular here, okay? It was very popular here, sort of going down gradually. This one might take off, maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. You want to do something in that area, go and check it out, okay? Make sense? I guess so.
How reliable is Google Trends, considering that in China there is no Google?
I'm sorry?
In China there is no Google, right?
Right.
And China is a big part of trends in the world, and so
Sure.
maybe Google Trends is not a good measure to.
This is definitely skewed. Absolutely, yes. That's the data they can get. Yeah. The nice thing about Google Trends, by the way, is not this, it's Google Insights. Okay, you go to Google Trends, you can actually look into the insights. And the insights are interesting things that they discover in the data. Okay, Google Trends just tells you about the future, about the past, and it also has something like about half a year of prediction. Okay, it's always included in the graphs. Google Insights, actually you look for interesting things. And that is more interesting. Okay, this is just to get validation, try to understand, try to study something. Okay. Okay. Let's look at other types of trends, because I did talk about technology trends, but it's not the only type of trends. Social trends, for example, do affect our lives. Young Americans, for example. Okay, you have friends. Some people here would be young Americans. Young Americans. One. Friends, young Americans. I'm talking about like really young Americans who, you know, like I just had a course. I taught students who came mostly from the US. They were 21, 22. That was their age. They were very different from any other audience I've ever encountered. Okay. So one thing I did is actually go and search for trends around young Americans. And these are 3 things I found, okay, which actually surprised me, really surprised me. One thing I found that they have a rising interest in drinking tea, okay? I don't think that's the most important or interesting thing. When I actually brought that into class, all of them stood straight and started looking at me, okay? I was saying something interesting for them. That's a rising trend, apparently. Any idea why that would happen? Because? I'm sorry? Tea is considered to be more healthy than coffee, especially if you're drinking in big amounts, so they want to be more healthy. So the trend of getting more into tea is actually driven by other trends, which is, for example, in this case, they do care about their health and the quality of their lives in that sense. So that was one trend I found. The other one, I actually find out that they have a declining interest in entrepreneurship. And that was a course around innovation and other courses around entrepreneurship. They're less interested in entrepreneurship. That was surprising. I actually talked to them. And the story they say, actually, is that if you look at them, okay, they're 21, 22. They're actually the first generation, or probably the first generation that's going to enter the work life in the US, are expected to earn less than their parents. Okay? Until today, every generation was wealthier than the previous generation. Today's generation, millennials, the Y generation, whatever you call them, they're the first generation that's expected to earn less money. Are they excited about taking economic risks? No, they're not. Okay, so they view entrepreneurship as being very risky. They really want to find a place that's stable, where they can make a reasonable living. Okay, their expectations are lower, and therefore they're actually less interested in entrepreneurship than, say, people who are 10 years older than them. Okay, so that was interesting to discover. And then the last thing, again, something I found, you know, all Israelis go after the army. They go abroad for a year. So Americans begin to do that as well. Okay, so they have a gap year, which they start to do. It wasn't that popular, and now it's becoming more popular. I think it's a cultural change as well. It's also the fact that they're not sure what to do about the future. They want to take some time off. They want to think. They want to see life differently. So that's something that's emerging. But overall, if you look at this group of people, okay, things are different there. Things are changing. And for example, if you want to develop a product or an application or something for them, you really want to understand that crowd. And by the way to understand them is not from Googling them, it's to actually doing things with them. Okay, that's the way I understand them. The nice thing though, that by asking questions and getting to know them, I could actually understand why these things are happening and what's going on. Okay? So social trends do affect the way we live, and they do affect decisions that we make. Economic trends, for example, we're seeing a lot of changes as well. Right, there's a big discussion today about the basic income. You heard about that? Governments that are actually paying basic income to all the citizens. So some countries are doing that, some countries are thinking to do that. It's a huge change in perception. It's probably driven by a lot of other trends, like maybe capitalism that doesn't work as well as we thought, maybe the understanding of governments, that their involvement needs to be different, okay, in the work environment. It's happening in the Western world, by the way, not in other places. A lot of interesting things happening. Is that going to really come true or not? I don't know. But it's definitely something very interesting to observe if it can affect you in any way. Okay, so that's an emerging trend at the moment. There's more interest in that. I'm not sure it's going to follow, by the way, the Gartner hype cycle. I have no clue what structure it's going to follow. And
Ask you that.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know because, for example, now there's some excitement about that. But it's also something for governments to choose. Okay, and when you look at Google, for example, they get the information of Gartner like from bigger data. And here it's basically decisions of governments, which are much more complex. So that's something to watch and see what happens. Now, if I had Googled it, which I didn't, I would see a rising interest. It's sort of people are talking about that today. They didn't talk about it last year that much. It's not that new, okay? It's been going on for years. And now there's a rising interest in that in the sense that we're trying to understand how we want our economy to work. There's some understanding that maybe the way it's managed is not really working. So this might be something interesting to watch, okay? And maybe another type of trends that do affect our lives, political trends. One political trend, if you just think about, this stronger gap that's building between governments and citizens. Citizens are much less happy with governments, and it's not just in Israel, and I don't want to talk about your specific opinions. It's happening everywhere in the world today. Okay, we see this growing gap, and something might happen because it might get to a point where, it just cannot stay any longer. This is another huge trend, okay? Again, it's emerging. I have no clue. I'm not a historian. There are some people here sitting who actually are historians. I don't know if it's going to take off. I don't know what's happening. It's interesting. It's emerging. The amazing thing, one of the amazing things about it, it happens so quickly. So quickly. This is their map for 2020. Okay, this is how they see the world in 2020. I really hope it's not going to work, by the way. Okay, so I hope this is going to change. But it does affect a lot of the things that we're doing. They do use new technologies. Okay, they use the internet like hell to recruit people, for example. So they use the new technology. And are they going to affect the way we live and the way we are? I don't know. I hope not. Okay, but maybe they will. So I just want to summarize that because I talked about a variety of trends, technology trends, and different type of trends. And if you're doing something, you want to do something new, you want to basically have a notion about the different types of things. Now, getting close to the end, I want to actually take it into two other places that I think would give you a different view. One is to talk about revolutions of trends. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the Victorian period in Britain was one of the most amazing periods in the history of not just Britain, but I think the world. In a period of around 60 years, okay, the times that the Queen Victoria was a queen, Britain became an empire. Okay, it's happening like 60, it became an empire. It developed so many new things, and actually there was a huge change that happened in the country. People moved from villages to towns and cities. So talking about internet as an infrastructure, there were actually many new infrastructures emerging at that time. Huge, major change. If I actually just go and look at this, you just get a sense for the many innovations in this period. But, okay, you look at that, And okay, you see the changes. So they basically, okay, they had part to do with new photography, with engines. They created the post, okay, the mail post, which you can laugh about it. It's a small thing that's extremely meaningful, okay, because it allows you things that you were really not able to do before. Christmas cards, ice cream, okay, bicycle, gliders, post boxes, okay, tons of new things basically that were created at that time. The light, okay, Edison, you can have an argument, okay, the US and Britain could argue about that. Camera, okay, lots of new things basically that happened in that time. Now, oops. Oh, where was I? Okay. Okay. I think the nice thing about it, if you think today that we're in times of big change, right? We talk about how things change very quickly. I think it was a major change, and things actually happened pretty fast. 67 years, right? We talk about the fact that our grandparents cannot communicate with you. Think about 67 years. You had people who were born in a village, and basically life changes into towns and cities, which were completely new to them. Major, major change. I guess what I'm trying to say now is that if you look at the period that we're living in, I talked about trends, and we sort of talked about long-term trends as like more than 10 years. Maybe we can even look at a bigger scale. And if you look at a bigger scale, what you do find is this. Okay, this is by an economist, Carlota Perez. She studied revolutions, okay, technology revolutions, and this is what she finds. She actually finds a common pattern to many of these revolutions. Okay, so if you look at it, for example, okay, you look at the oldest one, the Industrial Revolution, steam, okay, steel, electricity, all of these were new infrastructures, okay, based on new technology. And what you're seeing here is it actually took some time to evolve. You see the peak there, okay, similar to the Gartner hype cycle. Remember, we had a peak there of excitement. You see a big peak of excitement. She studied them. There was a huge excitement, okay, for example, where you started having the steam engines. There were a lot of entrepreneurs coming up with ideas for parts of engines and things like that. A big excitement. Investors also put a lot of money there. And there was a big hype, and then there was decline, there was disappointment, and eventually a lot of value created. Why? Because it takes time to create value from infrastructure, even though, of course, it's huge value. I don't know if you know the story of Chicago, for example, the city. Why would someone have a city like Chicago in one of the worst weathers that exist in the middle of nowhere? Any idea?
It's the deepest inland you can go on water from the ocean, no? You have the San Lorenzo River, it goes to the lakes. You can send a ship inland from the sea to Chicago.
From the sea, from the east.
The Atlantic Ocean.
The Atlantic Ocean. Maybe this is how Chicago started. What made it a huge, huge city was actually the creation of railroads. Okay, the creation of railroads actually made Chicago a huge city. It became the center for the meat industry. You would bring cattle in, okay, from the Midwest, and then you would distribute things for all the country. Okay, this was the story. So whenever I think about it, whenever a new infrastructure is created, you have railroads, you're going to have new cities created, right? You're going to have new things happening, and that's where you really want to be. It's like now, you know, if you think about Kvish 6, okay? So whenever we actually see a new transition, so the cities around it, okay, are actually, the life is improving, the value of the real estate is going up, and things are changing. Okay, so you think about internet, you think about smartphones today. Smartphones today, if you ask me, that's a whole new infrastructure. It's not just a phone, it's a whole new infrastructure. And of course, many things are going to happen and are going to be available and possible because of the existence of this new infrastructure, and it's just the beginning of that. Okay, so we see this pattern, and what we're doing today, our lives today, is actually not unique in that sense. And then maybe the last thing I want to talk about, singularity and life expansion. Okay, who here, have you heard about the Singularity University? Singularity, some of you have heard about. So let's talk a bit about the singularity, and let's talk about life extension, okay? Just as an extension of the talk about trends, okay? So the singularity is really about exponential curves. What is an exponential curve? This is an exponential curve. Okay, it's an example of that. Going up, the slope is changing. Okay, it's not the same slope. The slope is changing. The slope keeps going up. Okay, until eventually things go to explode or go to an unlimited number. The claim of singularity university today, but also we can see that in many things, the developments of new technologies today are beginning to show not a linear curve, but an exponential curve, okay? And let me show some examples to back it up, okay? You can see here, for example, okay, you look at evolution, okay, in the IT industry, okay? So you look at how things evolve. You can see, okay, that the capability, the ability of many things things were developing all the time, but they were happening more or less in a linear curve. If you look at some of the new things that are happening today, they happen faster. They happen faster for a variety of reasons, okay? A variety of reasons. First, we're all getting connected, okay? So if one person gets something, send it to two other people send it to two other people, and whatever, then we actually get an exponential development. Okay, so that affects many of the things we're doing. We're becoming more connected. It means we can develop things also in such a way. You have things like, okay, open source. So you can actually gather many more resources in a much faster time and also much more exposure. So basically things happening faster, and we're beginning to see more of these curves there. Okay, so that's a general trend. Maybe you want to check it out. Okay, I'm telling you a story. You're going to check it out later. Okay. If we're looking at, for example, the population growth, okay, the population keeps growing in spite of the fact that we have disease and things like that. This is actually the claim of how you would look at the, okay, at the number of people, okay, at the population growth, and it's actually growing exponentially, okay? That's a bit worrisome, right? It's growing exponentially. And also there are claims, okay, that 6 billion, 8 billion, at some point maybe, okay, the planet would not be able to host all of us. Might be issues there, okay, and it's growing. You can see by 2050, we're talking about 10 billion people, okay? So that becomes interesting, okay? Now I'm taking you to, okay, 2050, that's quite some time from today, but actually not so much time from today, okay? Think about yourself in 30 years, okay? It's not that far in the future. Ray Kurzweil, okay, I don't know if you know this person, you want to check him out, okay? He's the head of engineering of Google, which actually gives him credibility because many of the things he's saying might sound completely weird and completely out there, okay? He was the inventor of many things, and he was actually, okay, in the first. He could see things when they emerged, basically, and he could be there in the right time. And he's the person actually today talking about the singularity. It's not just him, it's a whole organization. But one thing they're saying, for example, that if you look at the power of computers, you look at the computational power, so basically what you see, it's a complex graph, but basically what you're seeing is that at each point here, okay, for example, at this point in time, if I had to actually predict the slope, that would get me, for example, to here. But as we moved on, and I have to predict the slope, it actually gets me higher and higher and higher. Okay, so the slope is changing. And basically what they're saying is that around 2030, okay, which is not that far, their prediction is the computer power will actually be able to do most of the things that the human brain does, okay, and that would make huge changes. Remember we talked about brain and computer interface, for example. That's just a small part of what's going to happen according to what they say. Now, so this is one curve, but they call it singularity. Why? Because basically, okay, many curves, don't worry, okay? But basically what you're seeing here, okay, so this magenta curve, that's the technology singularity, okay? That's the curve that we saw of the computational power. We see other curves here. We see some curves going up, some going down. For example, we see that global warming, okay, keeps going up, will create new issues. We can see that the rainforest, okay, the area keeps coming down, for example. We look at the world population, that keeps going up. Okay, we're seeing fisheries. They're actually going to end. If this prediction is true, of course, these are all predictions, okay? We don't know if it's going to happen or not. But if you look at these mega curves, basically what the singularity people predict is that around 2050, there's going to be a major change in the world. Why? Because things will not be able to run the same or just a little bit better than the way we see them today. Okay, things will have to be done differently. It sounds almost like an orthodox kind of like a religious belief, which in the beginning when I heard about them a few years ago, I thought that was a bit weird. I think it's going to create such a major change that for people to be able to actually think about it, many people need something that's close to a religious belief because it's too scary and it's going to be too different than the way things are happening today. Now, one of the things, for example, they talk about, and let's be a bit more specific about, they talk about life extension, okay? Life extension, let me explain what life extension is about. We know, right, that the average age, life expectancy, we know it keeps going up, right? You know, in the beginning of the 20th century, it was 50 years. Today, it's around 85, 88, depending on the country and on the gender. It keeps going up. It could still go up. It could go up till what number? Life expectancy. If you look at the world, okay, what is the maximum what is the age of the oldest person that lives?
16.
16. So if you look at it, actually, the life expectancy goes up. The maximum age does not go up. The maximum age is around 116, 120 maybe. That's the maximum. That was not extended. With all the medicine, with all the improvements, we were not able to get people to live longer in that sense. Now, Singularity University, they would talk about life extension. And then we talk about extending not the life expectancy, but extending the maximum age that we could live up to. And they talk about a significant extension. So they don't talk about eternity, but they talk about extension of maybe 50 years, something that is meaningful. And one more thing that they predict is that we could live longer, but also we would get there healthier. So we would not get to be 150 years old and looking, and when we're 100, we would not look like a person who's 100 years old today. Would actually look like a person who is like 50 years old today. Okay, so basically what they're predicting is that within, say, 30 years, we will be able to extend our life. Now, why are they telling the story? Again, that's a trend story, okay? That's a trend, it's a technology story. It's a long-term story, and that's a story, we don't know if it's going to happen or not. But what are they seeing? They're seeing, if they look at, and that's part of your work, okay? What they're seeing is that we actually make advances in 4 things that matter to this particular claim, okay? One, and I think you're reading about that, I read about that as well, but we're beginning to decipher the aging mechanisms, right? We're beginning to understand how it works, we're beginning to tinker with it, we're beginning to make some changes there. And so, for example, if we sorted it out, that would definitely help some people live much longer, okay? And I'm talking beyond the 120 years. So that's one thing that keeps changing. We're actually getting much better in fixing and replacing things, right? We're talking about today about DNA changes and medications around that, which is a whole new generation of medication. It's just the beginning, by the way, just emerging. But that will go on, and we'll know to do more with these things. We're getting better at replacing organs with silicone or with other artificial means. Okay, we're getting better at that. And maybe the last thing is that, and this is where it becomes a real big story, is that maybe at some point we can actually have computers to sort of replace us. And then they go into this philosophical discussion saying, for example, what does it mean to be me? Okay, where is my consciousness? And if I could actually pass everything that I am into a computer and say 2050 when they're strong enough, maybe that computer would also be me in the sense of that would have all my knowledge, all my information, and my consciousness as well. Okay, so it would be a big change. But anyway, so what they're doing here, and we started with very small trends, so actually taking that to the extreme. They're talking though about one huge change, that by the way, if you buy into that, it means that there are a lot of things you can do about it today, even today. If you want to create startup companies that are in the area that within, say, 10 years from today would be very valuable. For example, you know, you can have your DNA tested today. Yeah, we all know that. Who here got their DNA analyzed? None of you did it. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Suppose you would have done that, okay, and then you get the results, which are actually today are a bit limited because the US regulation limits the results you can get today. But suppose you can actually get access to the results, and there's amazing information about diseases that you might have in a better chance, and about your genome, and you brought that to your family doctor. They would have no clue what to do with that, okay? No clue. So if you think about it, one of the things that you expect to see in the next decade or 15 years is more and more companies and technology to help bridge the gap between your current family doctor and the great information that you can actually get from analyzing your genome, for example. That does not exist today. Okay, so that's a whole area for innovation, okay, and for doing business around this domain. I'm sorry?
That will affect a lot in the job market in the future. If you have your genome, let's say everybody has their, like a ID card, right. And if they know, okay, this person is going to have so and so disease, okay, the insurance company is gonna
it's gonna change the insurance, the way we do insurance, and guess what? Insurance companies are actually interested in this particular domain, even if it looks extremely futuristic. It's gonna change tons of things. It's gonna change the way our families are structured. It's gonna change many, many things, okay? So if that happens, you know, maybe yes, maybe not, and guess not, it's not so far in the future, okay? We should be able to see that affecting our lives within 5 or even 10 years, okay?
It can get treated earlier too.
I'm sorry?
It can get treated earlier too.
There is some medication. Exactly, yeah. So, I guess I just want to leave you with that, okay, and to summarize and to say that we talked about trends, okay. I think you want to get trend literate. You want to start seeing trends around you. They are around you all the time, okay. You get used to it, and it actually changes the way you look at things. So that's one thing, okay. So I hope I made you aware of the many things that are happening around us, and that you just start seeing them. And once you get the language, you see it even when you read the news, okay? Gives you a different perspective about things. Of course, you know, you want to know the trends, maybe you want to affect the trends, you want to change the future, again, depending on who you are, what your position, and what you want to do, okay? But it's definitely possible to do that. And I think maybe last thing to remember is that, of course, technologies, they have a major impact on why things change, even life extension that is about pure technology and science, okay? But however, because life is changing and the world really keeps changing all the time, I think one thing one needs to do is learn and learn and learn and never stop doing that, okay? So if you think you're here, you're learning, and one day it's going to end, I really hope for you it's not. Okay, maybe not in this environment, maybe in a different one, but you want to keep learning because there's always going to be stuff to learn, and there's going to be changes in the world that you want to adapt to and maybe even lead. Okay, that's what I want to leave you with. So thank you for being here, and I wish you great success in the future.